Hello and welcome to the Celtic Huddle podcast. I'm Mark Wilson. I'm joined today once again by Simon Donnelly. We're also joined by former Celtic star, icon, Paul Elliott. What a guest that is. Signed by Billy McNeill. Paul was one of the best central defenders to wear the Hoops shirt in the past 40 years. Also joining us today, John McGARRY from the Scottish Daily Mail. He's been close to all the major stories at Parkhead this season. So, on today's podcast, we'll reflect on Sunday's 1-1 draw against Rangers and the class shown by Celtic captain Scott Brown. We'll also have the latest news on what's unfolding this afternoon on his future at the club. We'll also assess new signings coming in and the guys to tell us who they would like to join the club. We'll also get all the latest news on the managerial front. Will the new man be appointed during the international break, which is quite often the case in these situations? We'll also have a wee bit of fun at the end with the guys and ask them to tell us their best new signing initiation stories. Who was the best and worst singer? Who told the funniest and worst joke? So stay with us for the next 45 minutes. And also, we've got a wee poll up and running, a new feature this week, but it's quite an important point. The story breaking that Scott Brown may be just on the verge of joining Aberdeen the next 48 hours. So at Huddle Celtic on Twitter, we've got the poll running. So at the minute, it's saying 77% would like to see Scott Brown remain. So we'll keep you updated, but get your points into that. And also to the Celtic fans, get your questions in. We'll get through as many as we can. We'll put them to Paul. We'll put them to Simon. And I'm delighted to say, once again, the podcast is now sponsored by First Star Legends Gin, First Class Transfers and Social Recluse. We thank them all for their support. So let's get to it. There's no time to waste. Game v Rangers, we'll start with, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest, an iconic figure for Celtic, Paul Elliott. How are you doing, Paul?
Yeah, I'm good, Mark. Hope you're good and all your listeners are good as well, in good form.
Yeah, all good here, mate. Thanks very much for coming on. Thanks for your time. It's amazing, Paul. I was just chatting to the guys before we came on, and your time at Celtic, I mean, you came in, 89, left in 91, round about that time. Yeah. I was 5-year-old, 6-year-old, but you're still etched in my memory as such an iconic figure for your time at the club and what you've done. You must have some great memories at the club, and our listeners and followers with some good comments already down the side about you. Great time at the club.
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I wasn't sure, if I'll be honest with you. I mean, I've done 2 great years in Italy, really enjoyed myself. But it was my pal, one of my best mates in football, Mark Walters, when it was amongst the rumour factory that Celtic wanted to sign me. And he said to me, big man, get yourself up here. You'll absolutely love it. Great people, great supporters, really passionate, great football, fast, ferocious. I remember my debut, I think I needed an extra lung, to be quite honest with you, from a slow, calculated pace in Italy to all of a sudden, the ball needed to be stretchered off at half-time for a massage as well. It was just a fast pace. But, ultimately, I've got so much respect and love for the Scottish people, the humour, the kindness, the generosity, and obviously their love and passion for football as well. So it was a wonderful 2 years of my career.
Yeah, excellent. And some of the most important games you played, of course, against Rangers, you scored a couple of goals in that game. I mean, just like myself, Paul, fellow goal scorer against Rangers. Simon?
I know, we just seem to be bringing guests on here that have scored against Rangers. It just makes me feel even worse, man.
Me and Paul are on the same wavelength here. But look, let's go into the Rangers game on Sunday. What did you think of the 1-1 draw? Was it a bit of a tame affair? Should Celtic have won it overall? What did you make of it?
Are you talking to myself? Sorry.
Yeah, Paul, sorry.
Forgive me. I don't know if you're talking to the guys. Yeah, I mean, it was always going to be challenging because I think, Rangers having the ascendancy, going into the game with great confidence. And I think all the stuff that I picked up in the media along, the pre-build up to the journey, was there going to be, the celebration, the respect shown and everything else. So it was always going to be a hard one for Celtic psychologically. But I think, ultimately, as well as me being a Celtic man, more importantly, I'm a football man. I love football, and I know Steven Gerrard, and he has made a fantastic impact, and we can't underestimate the magnitude of what he's achieved in 3 years. It deserves a lot of credit, a lot of respect, and I think now, probably the game panned out the way I wanted it, because I didn't really want, Rangers to go and batter them emphatically, but also from a position of pride, respect. It was also that Celtic, important that it showed that professional pride as well, which they did. So in the end, I think the 1-1 was probably about the fair outcome on the game.
Yeah, listen, you played in an era where it was incredibly difficult against Rangers. They had the upper hand, of course. There was that big revolution at Rangers at the time, and you found it particularly difficult to play against them. This Celtic team kind of stopped the rot of losing. Well, it was 3 games in a row they had lost. You probably experienced similar. Is that important?
Yeah, Mark, the problem is you've got 2 huge clubs, within like a 3 or 4 mile radius of each other, and the pressure, the intensity. But there's a key word called professional pride. And notwithstanding the fact that Rangers, as you know, I think they're still unbeaten in the league. I mean, 20-odd points clear. It's Celtic's pride, it's their professional pride. And I think that was at stake. The most important thing was at stake was that. And I've been there where when I joined Celtic, Rangers was such a dominant force. But then they had sort of Graham Souness, Terry Butcher, Mark Hateley, Coisty, Gary Stephen, Trevor Stephen, Trevor Hurley. I know all the names, They were formidable. And I think that this was a different type of Rangers, that Gerrard has built a team and built a very capable and a very good side. So I think that, it's about now Celtic regrouping, recollaborating, looking at their bigger picture now, because I think moving forward, there's a lot of work to be done on the player acquisition. They've got to get that right, and they've got to decide, they've got to invest moving forward now to compete. It's all about competing now, because, by their own standards, they have been poor.
Yeah, well, Robbie Smith here, first comment, Celtic should have won on Sunday if we had taken our chances. There was Brian Murphy earlier on. Paul, here's one for you. My papa is 87 and he still talks about seeing you playing at Fir Park for Celtic against Motherwell, says you were fantastic. So you are very much still in the minds of, the older Celtic generation. Simon, I mean, the game, the way it panned out, Celtic had such a strong period. Probably regret not to kill them off when at the tail end of that first half. But it was better for Celtic. They did stop the rot. The next game against Rangers is on the 2nd of May at Ibrox. How important is it that Celtic stop Rangers' unbeaten run this year?
I think that's the challenge now, isn't it? To go and they talk about the Invincibles, and Celtic obviously achieved it a few seasons back. So that's the challenge for Celtic now, to go and apply a defeat on Rangers. I think the game at the weekend, it was pretty similar to the New Year game. I thought Celtic started well, started reasonably strong, looked threatening, got the goal this time, got ahead in the game. Couple of wee calls for a penalty, whether it was or not, but then, the Achilles heel this season has been set plays. And after giving away, I heard Bruni after it, I think they thought it might have been a free kick on Kenny. It was an unorthodox clearance. They get the corner, and then it's Kenny himself that just
switches off.
Concentration at the back post. You two guys here know better than me defending, but just impede Morelos' run. Go with them, stop the run, but just went to sleep.
Yeah, and that costs you in these games. We all know that one lapse in concentration. Look, just for the Celtic fans again, on the at Huddle Celtic, Celtic fans, would you like to see Scott Brown stay at Celtic FC for one more season? Get your poll in, yes or no. 77% say yes, 23% saying no. So on Scott Brown, he showed his ability on Sunday, obviously won man of the match on Sky. He dominated the tempo for Celtic. Paul is wanted by Aberdeen, as we're just chatting in there, for a player coach role. But should Celtic give the skipper a new deal? He'll be 36 in June, but he showed on Sunday he's still a top performer for Celtic.
And a very consistent one. Very capable player, good leader. I think I've always believed this thing. I mean, I had to retire the game earlier. I mean, I wish I could have played at 36. I had to come out the game just past my 30th birthday. And I always say you should play for as long as you can, because you're a long time out of the game as a player. But notwithstanding that, when the opportunity to become a player coach is obviously a very good one. And Aberdeen, I've always thought they're an excellent club, very stable club. And it's the right kind of club where he can evolve and grow if he's got those aspirations. So sometimes, probably he's thinking, is this the right time to move on? I personally feel he's got another season less than him, another good season left. And I still think, opportunities will still emerge because he's a sought-after guy, and he's one that, the way he plays, the way he leads, he's got that sort of coaching, managerial maturity about him. So I'm always, as a player, I always say, play as long as you can. But, if there's an opportunity for his career to be activated, then Aberdeen is as good as opportunity that comes.
Yeah, I think Celtic are losing out massively here if Scott does decide in the next 48 hours to go to Aberdeen. Because, for all the sticks Scott Brown has got this year, and I think he would admit himself, he's probably not been at his best, Sid, but he's by and far no means one of the worst performers in the side. When you look at the underperformers, underachievers in the side this season, you could probably rhyme off a good half dozen, even more, that have been poorer than him. And Scott has carried that team for so many years. When he's having a bit of an off season, he could have done with some people helping him. But on Sunday, in big games this season, again voted man of the match, he's still a player that could, just help the new players, new manager, new coaching team settle into the club. It'd be a big loss. What do you think? Huge loss.
I think for the new management team coming in here and transition at a period in Celtic's history where there's going to be a lot of coming and going, I think somebody with his leadership, his captaincy, I think is so important round about the club. I really do. On the pitch, off the pitch, everything to do with it. Talk about your man that we've got on here in terms of leadership. Scott's out of that book as well. I think it's a huge loss if he goes. I think he deserves the right to make that decision. He's achieved so much in his time at Celtic. If he decides to go, then I wish him well, but I'd really like him to stay another year at Celtic.
Yeah, well, a good few comments coming in saying that, Aberdeen are getting their managerial team in place already, Paulie. To hear Celtic can't afford to lose another big leader. Too many have left in the past 2 years. Edward Land here, we already have a massive task rebuilding and challenging for title next year. We don't have a ready-made leader to step in. Keep him next season is vital. Paul, on another big issue this week, Glenn Kamara and what happened on Thursday night. The club's had a big decision to make on Sunday, how they would front up to this. And you've fought a long battle against racism. You remain active in education in the game. What did you make of the gesture? Scott Brown's show of solidarity towards Glenn Kamara before kick-off. What did you make of that?
Scott Brown, top class. I mean, ultimately, although we are players, we are competing against each other. We have different cultures, different nationalities, come from different sort of cultural and ethnic backgrounds. We are just human beings, and we get hurt, we get affected by some of the things that people say, the way people behave very disrespectfully and dishonourably. So I think, that's, the human side come back to this, because this was about, solidarity and respect for one pro against another, and Scott showing that support through another person's adversity. So I think, that's what always gives hope, particularly in that environment, because as you know, there's been sort of other bigger, sort of wider political issues that's been historical, in Scottish history for many years. And it's another form of racism, but it's about, zero tolerance to all forms of racism and discrimination. And I just feel that, Rangers, Celtic, they do a lot of brilliant work in the community that probably doesn't necessarily get the accolades that it deserves, but the players, the managers, the coaches, I get on very well with Fraser Wishart at the SPFA. He's an excellent advocate of change. You've got Show Racism, the Red Card, Jed Greby. So all the players now, they've got that kind of what I call that social responsibility to use their power in the right and meaningful way to make a positive contribution, but as role models, to go into schools, to educate young people, because they know, they've got great voices and they're using their power wisely, judiciously and constructively for the betterment of change.
Yeah, and the pictures that went round, obviously the world, Celtic and Rangers are worldwide clubs. Yeah. Surely that must make some sort of impact when they see these two great rivals but come together for one cause. Now, we'll go around the world, but in terms of UEFA, do you think it would strike a chord with UEFA? Do they care about things like that?
I think they do. I mean, I sit on UEFA's sort of social responsibility anti-discriminatory committee, and this is at the forefront of what they're trying to do. But I think the challenge is about sort of diversity of thought, diversity of thinking. And if you look at when I first come to Scotland, I was probably one of the first few black players to come and play in Scotland in the 1980s. Now it's fixture and fitting, isn't it? Celtic 4 or 5 black players, Rangers 4 or 5 black players, other clubs black players. So that diversity is so important, and I think from UEFA's perspective, UEFA has to have more, I call ex-players, more players from diverse backgrounds involved in the decision-making processes, so you can educate people, because I can go into those meetings, those discussions, and talk about the challenges, but really focused on solutions and give them my thoughts as a player that's been in the heat of the battle, that's had those experiences, but turned them from negative to positive, and going there, not necessarily now talking about the problem, but talking about how together we're going to find the solutions.
Yeah, well said. I mean, you've experienced it straight from the outset 30 years ago, of course, and went through it all. Simon, I mean, both sets of managers and players, backroom staff stood shoulder to shoulder instead of taking the knee. I mean, how powerful an image was it? It was quite something to see.
It was great to see, actually, Willow, and a simple gesture by Scott Brown before the game towards Glenn Kamara, but such a powerful one. And as Paul says, there's no place for racism at all in life, never mind sport. So it was great to see the two teams come together. Obviously, after that, it's 90 minutes of football, and you're big rivals, but it was a touch of class for Brunei. Yeah,
well said. Okay, moving on, new signings then. Now, listen, it's no surprise that Celtic will need to make a number of them. Sid, still defensive lapses on Sunday, we touched on it there. How important is it to get quality goalkeeper? And that's number one position, and 2 central defenders, pretty much like the man we've got on here would do, not too bad, but it's a big summer to get those 3 positions right, is it not?
It is, but they have to get it right. I watched Fraser Forster at the weekend there, and I just wish he was back at the club. He was such an important player last year. I don't know if that's one that could be revisited. The 2 fullbacks obviously are going to go back, Kenny and Laxalt.
Yeah.
I know Greg Taylor's still there, but yeah, centre backs, huge position for the club to sort over the summer. But I think you look right through the team. I mean, if Bruni's going to move on, you're going to have to be looking in that central midfield area. Edouard moving on, striker, there's going to be a lot of change.
Full spine of the team could need replaced here. Anthony McPeak, I only wish we could have a centre half of Paul's ilk now. How much would he be worth today? An absolute fortune. Agree with that, Paul? Would you be worth a fortune? Well, worth a fortune back in the 90s anyway. What was that, 1.4 million?
Something like that, but which is a long time, isn't it? 30 years ago. It was a fair amount of money today. But hey, listen, I was just grateful, honoured and privileged that I had a career of doing something that I wanted to do as a kid, and to do it in different environments, in the first division in England then, and then obviously going to Italy, and then to Scotland, and then back to Chelsea. So I'm not going to complain. Yeah.
Paul, what do you actually make of the quality of central defenders in the modern game? Not just Celtic, I suppose. Yeah. I think Celtic have fell into the trap of the modern game. I try to play out and, not being very aggressive. But what do you think of the overall standard of centre-halves? It's a different game nowadays, is it not?
Absolutely. And I think if you think about it, I was sort of looking at, when you're looking at somebody like, the Man United centre-back, Maguire, £85 million is a staggering amount of money. He's an extremely good player. But it's just hard for me in my own head to equate £85 million for a central defender. But what's happened is, it's not just, centre halves have always been forward, but it was always about the goal scorers. It was that they were worth their money. But the centre half position, I think, over the last 5 or 6 years has become such an important role. I think it's always been, but more so about the characteristics now of what the centre half is, because everybody talks about now a centre half with pace, a centre half who's very dominant, and it's just quite interesting that you know, there's more footballing centre backs, but people want to go back to your traditional Billy McNeill type of centre half, very dominant, very aggressive. And I suppose I had those kind of characteristics, but obviously I was a respectable athlete as well, and could carry the ball from the defence. So you know, it's just quite interesting how the role has evolved, and that sort of leadership. I mean, I suppose, you know, John Terry arguably for me has been one of the best. Rio Ferdinand has been one of the best. I rate them better than the modern day centre backs, to be quite honest with you, because they could do everything all in one. Yeah. And it's fascinating how the values of them has just gone through the roof exponentially. The value now of a top centre half, you know, particularly one that can, you know, do it at both boxes, attack and defend as well.
Well, it's a good point. I mean, the big one for me is Virgil van Dijk, who of course Celtic brought here, sold on, and you're right, Paul, he can do everything, and to be honest, I think he has made the difference this season for Liverpool, where I'm not being in the team. They fell apart, and it just goes to show you your point. Having a good centre half could be the result of you know, finishing second in the league, 23 points behind Rangers, or you know, winning and progressing in Europe. So it's a hugely important position. You're completely right. Martin Lavelle here, new approach needed in signing players, allows always too slow in public. Ben Davies rotting away at Liverpool is criminal, of course. Celtic lost out of him in the last few days of the window. Bringing in John McGARRY now. John for the Scottish Daily Mail. John, how are you doing? Thanks for joining us.
Good, thanks, lads.
John, listen, we're on the subject of players. We were chatting about centre halves there, but there's going to be a big turnaround at Celtic. And I was chatting to the guys beforehand now. In 2010, 2011, Neil Lennon's first full season in charge, when I was there was a turnaround, I think, in the region of 16 players, perhaps. A huge turnaround, big names like Boric and McGeady, Stephen McManus, along with a couple of fringe players went. And then came the likes of Joe Ledley, Hooper, Izagiri, you know, Kyle. There was a full rebuild. Now, it looks like it's going to be a similar turnaround. Any news on any players coming in, or who do you think may be leaving?
I think the problem is that until the head coach or the manager is established, you know, it's going to be pretty difficult for Celtic to go out and sign anybody. But it's pretty clear, though, that the rebuild required this summer is going to be of a scale we've not seen in living memory, really. And that was always going to be the case, just given the number of players that are clearly wanting to leave, such as Edouard, and players who look as if they're, you know, looking to move on, Scott Brown's case. And then you've got a handful of loan players who will all get back to their parent clubs. So, listen, you could be looking at 7, 8, 9, 10 players required quite easily. I mean, certainly a goalkeeper, probably 2 centre halves and a fullback, a midfielder. I mean, up front, you know, is Griffiths going to be there? Not convinced. Albion Ajeti didn't even make the bench at the weekend, albeit that'll be for the new manager to decide upon. But it's absolutely it's colossal, you know, and it's you can't help thinking that the kind of clock is already ticking. But really, until such time as a new manager is appointed, the situation doesn't really move forward.
Yeah, and listen, see, when a new manager is appointed, what kind of money are you thinking, John, that could be on the table for him to spend? We all know the troubles with COVID and what it's brought, and the outgoings are pretty high at the minute without much coming in. Is he going to have enough money to rebuild the full club?
It's a good question. I mean, for all the criticism that could rightly be levelled at Celtic this season, the one thing you have to remember is they spent, I think, net about £15 million last summer. It was our biggest net spend in many a long year. It was how they spent it that was the problem. They are going to have to come up with a kind of similar figure to that. Obviously,
but they did waste. Listen, John, they did waste 10 of that, didn't they? We had Yeti and Barkas and things like that. So it needs to be spent wisely. What he ever gets.
Yeah, and they're going to have to recoup what they can. I mean, you know, if you know, assuming somebody like Edouard is wanting to move on, you've got to try to kind of get that situation resolved fairly quickly, so you've got money in the kitty to then reinvest. If Christopher Ayer's looking to move on, you know, you have to kind of progress that. So I think the real first task of the new manager is to establish who wants to be there and who doesn't. You then got to try to get buyers for these players, and at the same time, you're going to have to start recruiting for positions which are either at this distance, you know for a fact are going to require filling.
Yeah, Paul. In terms of reshuffling a team, rebuilding a team, what areas do you think are imperative to get right? If you're a blank canvas in front of you, what positions do you go for? Get right and build round about it.
I always look at the spine of the team. So you've got your goalkeeper, your centre back, your centre midfield, and your centre forward. It's just like the spine on your body. That's what holds you together. And I think every position's important. But I think once you've got that, if you look at all the big teams, you look at Liverpool that sort of won the Liverpool that won the Premier League last season. You had Alisson, you had Van Dijk at centre half. You had Fabinho, you had Jordan Henderson, and then obviously you had the potent strike force up front. Salah. It's critical. All the big teams, Chelsea back in the day, you had your goalkeeper, you had John Terry, you had McGARRY, you had your top class centre forward. So I just feel the spine is the critical point of every team. You get that right, and then you build the rest of the jigsaw around it.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Sid. A name that hasn't went away really from the summer that I think Celtic should go for again, just to get in the door. Number one, it would sort out the problem. I think they should go for David Marshall again. People say, it's a step backwards. He's 35 years old, 36 years old. But I look across the city and see Alan McGregor come to Rangers at, what was he, 38 when he came or something, 37. David Marshall, I see pictures of him. He's holding the Player of the Year for Scotland trophy. I know he's still got another year to go, but surely Marsh would be... he would be up for coming back to Glasgow. But the goalkeeper is an important point. Paul's right, the spine of your team. And it looks like Celtic could lose the full lot. So a new manager has to rebuild it. Do you agree?
Yeah, 100%. That's the ones that they need to look at. Davy Marshall's name obviously came up at the start of the season. Maybe a wee bit surprised that they didn't, go for him for whatever reason. When the Forster situation obviously wasn't going to happen. But Davy... to coin a phrase, safe pair of hands, a really good goalkeeper. Yeah. And has been over the course at Celtic. He's got the experience of handling, that job at Celtic. So he could be one. I've seen on the signs up there, maybe the Dundee United goalkeeper. I think he's been linked before. I think he's had a couple of good games against Celtic this year. But yeah, the spine of the team, it has to be. And not even more. If Scotty goes away, if Scotty moves in the next 48 hours, that central midfield needs to be replaced as well. Yeah,
well, the poll has gone up. Should he be awarded a new year at Celtic? 78% saying yes, 22% saying no. Gillian Gallagher here, agree, go for Marshall and the Hibs keeper too. Declan Gallagher's great buy, should go for him too. Of course, Declan Gallagher, Scotland centre half. Can I get a game for Motherwell? At the minute, he's been on the bench the last few weeks, but listen, he looks better with better players round about him, so that could be one for the future. Let's move on. New manager. Now, I keep saying every week that we hope things would move on and we could have other things to chat about in terms of new managers, but it has been incredibly quiet again this week. Celtic holding their cards very close to their chest. Gents, it appears the two names who remain high in the list are Enzo Maresca of Manchester City and Roy Keane. John, any update on those or any new names in the frame?
Well, the other name that's come into the reckoning is Jesse Marsh, the Red Bull Salzburg manager, who spoke very publicly about his admiration for Celtic, and it was a kind of good old-fashioned come and get me plea. Now this is a guy who is about to win a second consecutive double in Austria. He's very, very highly thought of, both in America and in Austria, clearly, and in Germany. I don't think he's going to be short of offers, but that is a really interesting candidate, and I think that's something that Celtic should really be exploring. I mean, this guy seems to have, this football his teams play is explosive, high tempo, high pressing, but he gets results, and he's looking for a move to Britain at some point. I think he's 47 now. Started off as assistant to the United States national team, was at New York Red Bulls, then moved to Leipzig. He was assistant manager when Celtic played them a few years ago, and he's now got out on his own. I think he would be a really, really interesting choice.
Yeah, listen, he was. I read a lot about him. Now, it's quite unusual, I thought, his interview. Usually you hear managers saying, I've got a job to do here. Thanks for the interest, but I'm fully focused. To say that he was flattered with the interest, of course, it's an interesting proposition, was quite telling for me. But again, there's others who say that he's destined for a club in the Bundesliga. It was interesting to see Xabi Alonso saying that, getting the Mönchengladbach job and then the old merry-go-round over there.
I think he was in line for that, was he not? Or had his eye on that one, and then obviously Alonso being appointed has kind of closed the door on that one for him. I don't know much about the guy. Is it a come and get me plea? I don't know.
The one thing about him, John, he said he wondered if, more or less to paraphrase him, if he'd be allowed to have a kind of project to work the way he wanted to work, and to get the idea that winning wasn't really the important thing at the get-go. That doesn't really work, does it, at Celtic? Or should Celtic fans be more broader-minded to that approach in this next season?
Yeah, I mean, that was the one comment that kind of jumped out a wee bit, that you would think, in terms of the environment that he would be getting dropped into, where you have to win yesterday and win tomorrow and win all the time. But I did like his kind of thinking in terms of being able to totally restructure the club, and the kind of the attention to detail, and listen. Someone like him, or indeed Maresco, is going to be a gamble. But if you're going to employ somebody like that, you have to give them the scope to do as you please, and you have to give them time as well. If you're looking for a quick fix solution, then they're probably not your guy. And given the number of players that are going to be required to come in this season, it is going to be transitional anyway. There's no escaping that. People are not blessed with a huge amount of patience in this part of the world. That is the issue. And next season, it's going to have its challenges. There's no doubt about that. But this guy's track record is seriously impressive. The one thing that distinguishes him from Maresca is he has obviously managed at first team level, and he seems to be doing very, very well, So, listen, if it's not a conversation that Dermot Desmond has had already, it's one he should be having.
Yeah, Christopher O'Rourke here says, the thing is though, fans need something before we would renew season tickets. I'm guessing that as yikes, which is quite right. Paul, what do you make of the situation, the Celtic managerial situation? Neil obviously goes his own way, but it's been a number of weeks now without any real word from anybody at Celtic. How do you assess some of these names, Maresca and Roy Keane and Jesse Marsh?
I think they're all capable, and I have to send my kind of commiserations to Neil, because he's a good guy, he's a good mate of mine. I've got a lot of respect for him. So he's done well, and he should always be remembered for the good that he done, notwithstanding the way things ended out in the end. But to be honest with you, whilst the three that I think are capable, I've got somebody in my view that I think is better for a number of reasons, and I'll explain why. I would go for Eddie Howe, ex-Bournemouth. He's 43 years of age. He's got great experience as a Premier League manager. He's a young man. He's hungry. He's taken time out the game. And I think coming to Scotland would be a really great challenge for him. Celtic is a huge club, big fan base. If you think about it, he's got a lot more experience than Steven Gerrard. He'd be a great competitor for Steven Gerrard, because Gerrard will look over the fence and think, my goodness me, this man knows his stuff. And also critically as well, there's no compensation involved as well. And I could see his career like sort of Brendan, that when Brendan got sacked from Liverpool, he needed that opportunity to reconnect, took time out, reinvigorated himself, reinvented himself. And I think Eddie would be the perfect person. He's the right age. I think there's a hunger, there's a desire, there's an experience, because I think the next manager you need that continuity and stability, which equals success. And I think he could come to Celtic, and over the next 2 or 3 years, he could really make a big positive impact. And I just think with what he would bring, and also the players he will be able to attract as well, you know, from obviously down south, that could be real quality. He's a gentleman of a person, great pedigree, right age, no compensation, really good experience. And I think that the Scottish adventure would be a wonderful one for him, where he would do extremely well.
Yeah, I don't think you're alone on this show over a number of weeks, even before Neil lost his job. Eddie Howe, we had hundreds of comments in saying that Eddie Howe
must
must
get at one point.
Yeah,
Must
get Eddie Howe now, get him in, get Neil Lennon away. Then when Neil left, Eddie Howe's going to be appointed, must be. But it's went quiet. So my question would be, if it is going to be Eddie Howe, why hasn't it been done? I see he was on Sky Sports, a pundit last week. Has a question been asked? Is he waiting on another job down south, or?
Yeah, it's a very good point. And the oddness is, Mark, that down here there hasn't been much noise about Eddie Howe. To be quite honest with you, he's not actually been linked with any real other clubs. So it's just been he's been sort of phased out in many respects. So maybe he's kind of consolidating. But I think that, you know, I mean, I think, would he get a Premier League job next year? I think there's a possibility he might be waiting to see what happens down south. But certainly, you know, would he get a top 6 club? No. Would he get a club sort of mid-table downwards? Yes. So for me, because he's of that age profile, you could take a gamble, and somewhere like Scotland could be great for you for 2 or 3 years. So, you know, this might be to come. He's clearly consolidated. Or it might be that, you know, he may get a club that's promoted to the Premier League. But he's just one, you know, with all these things, you know, I think the good thing is he's keeping his counsel, he's keeping his head down. Other people are talking about him. He's not chucking his hat in the ring. But, you know, the people at sort of executive and director level, they know who's available and they know the mechanisms to engage. And I think somebody like Eddie Howe, I just think would be really, really, really good, because he's an elite manager now, but he's a young man. I mean, Roy Keane's very capable, great pundit, but Roy's been out of the managerial game, for a little while, albeit he's still a very young man and a big name, obviously given his history with Celtic before. But Eddie Howe is the proven real deal at the top level. Yeah,
and listen, would the players, I take it, you know him well, the players would want to play for him. I think we all know the importance of playing in a team that the manager just brings something else out in you that you want to play for him. I mean, Paul, you played for, Billy McNeill. That must have been unbelievable in terms of wanting to play for the guy. I mean, firstly, what was that like? And secondly, would players react in a similar fashion, want to play for Eddie Howe?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point to answer your first point, Mark, because, I mean, when I came to in Celtic in 1989, first and foremost, it was the manager that attracted me. You know, I knew about Celtic, great club, big club, history, 1967, Jock Stein, you know, Jiggy Johnson, the whole journey I was aware of as a kid growing up. But, you know, you play for the manager. And I think you've seen that in the modern day player, isn't it? You know, when Ancelotti goes there, you know, he draws top class players. You know, Guardiola, top class players. Jurgen Klopp. It's players that play for managers now, not for the club. And I think that in Eddie's, players will play for him. You know, and me, you know, to answer your question, playing for Big Billy was fantastic. I was with him previously at Aston Villa before I went to Italy, so he knew of me, knew of my characteristics, knew what I could do. And he said to me, big man, once you get here, you settle, you know, not just your playing ability, but your personality, you would score favourably. You know, you take people with you. I trust you. And I mean, he said to me, he didn't trust me on a Saturday night, but he trusts me on a Saturday afternoon. So I said, one out of 2, Gaffer, can't be bad, can it? Let's be honest with you. Trust me when it matters, mate, you know? So it was absolutely brilliant. And his man management with me, and he was brilliant with me, because obviously I'd been on the road for sort of 5 or 6 years. And, you know, because I had the respect of the players, the dressing room, you know, I could go back to London and, you know, allow them to go back, spend an extra couple of days, knowing that I'll come back, I'll do the business, train hard, play hard, not letting down. So all those other things are very, very good managerial, good player man management. So listen, I love him, but, you know, I feel for Liz, you know, with obviously the adversity with his passing, but he's not just a great player, but a great man, you know, and those things. He's got great values, and what he done, he cared so much about people. That's why I loved him to bits, and a good man, and a great loss for society and human decency, as well as football.
Yeah,
of course.
well said, Paul. Listen, but Paul touched on a good point there about the relationship between a manager and his players. Paul says there that Billy handled them, that he could go down south and have a few days with his family, and there was a mutual understanding that he would come up and play. That is the modern manager, is it not, Sid? I mean, you had Tommy Burns, who was probably ahead of his time, I guess, in that situation. Must have been unreal in those days, but a modern manager like Eddie Howe has to be like that with the players. But Tommy, I mean, the relationship you guys had with him, echoed on the pitch, you could see.
Yeah, he'd go just what Paul's saying there about Billy McNeill. Obviously, Tommy played under Billy as well, and he was out the same book. He would go above and beyond for his players, and that wouldn't have just been coaching, that would be anything in their private lives. If he could make things easier for them, he would do it, and that in turn, the player would want to run through a brick wall for him on a Saturday or a match day. TB was exceptional, and just again reflecting on what Paul's saying there, a man, a real great man. But yeah, if you can get that magic in a dressing room and players want to play for you, then you're ahead of the game. They two were certainly two of the best.
Yeah. Paul, here's another one for you. Jim Thompson, Paul Elliott, great player and a top bloke. Just as simple as that. At least you're well thought of. Yeah. Gents, right, okay, give us a name then. Who is getting the job? We change our minds every week on this because the bookies' odds go up and down and nothing moves. I'm more inclined to think it could be Jesse Marsh. What about yourself, Paul? Got a name that stands out? Well, you Eddie Howe, but do you really think he will get it? If not, any others?
I genuinely believe, I mean, to be honest with you, I can see why Roy would fancy the job, to be honest with you. Roy would definitely fancy the job. And I think he would do a good job, no question about that. But I'm kind of batting firmly with Eddie because I still feel... I don't know. It's just an instinct that I've got. I've not heard from third party. I'm just going with my instinct. But somebody, I'm just so convinced about him and everything that I see. Where's Celtic are, what they need, and I just think it's the job kind of needs Eddie more than Eddie needs the job. Because I think he needs to come away from England. He's been at one club a really, really long time. He had opportunities to go to Everton and other clubs. It allegedly didn't materialise. So I think he needs to virtually come away and reinvent himself as a manager again. And I think coming away north of the border with that intensity, that pressure, Rangers, the need to win every week, it's going to get the best out of his managerial characteristics. That's why I feel the job needs Eddie more than Eddie needs the job. Because I don't think at this juncture where he is in his career path, another job in England, no, come away, something new, something different. He needs to be challenged. He needs to be tested. And I think, the elements of the size of Celtic, the intensity, the pressure, what it all stands for, as Gerrard has articulated so well, it's such a unique environment that, you never experience that. And that's the perfect grounding for Steven Gerrard to go on to do great things, which he will do, but also the great platform for Eddie Howe to reinvent himself.
Yeah, Naughty Boy Kearney here has a good point on what you're saying there, Paul. If Eddie Howe has any ambitions in Europe, then he should take the Celtic job. Of course, if you take a club in the lower part of the Premiership down south, Premier League, you're never going to test yourself in Europe. So it's a good angle into that. John, you get any thoughts? I mean, you're on here every week, every second week, and nothing moves on. But when you hear Jesse Marsh, when you hear Paul speak about Eddie Howe, Martin O'Neill on the TV the other day ruling himself out, but tipping other people, what do you think yourself?
Having just kind of made the case for Jesse Marsh, purely in terms of the fact that Celtic should speak to him, I'm inclined to agree with Paul, because I think that Eddie Howe ticks so many boxes. I mean, if you look at what he did, I mean, Bournemouth were on the verge of getting out of the Football League. He took them over and given time, he took them, to become a real force in the Premier League, albeit with a brief stop off at Burnley. This guy can really create something. He's articulate. players just seem to sort of love playing for him. They play a good style of football. I think the analogy that Paul used there about Brendan Rodgers, just trying something totally different, coming up here to a hugely competitive environment with the possibility of Champions League football, which with the best one in the world, he's not going to get the sort of clubs he's liked at the moment. It's a guy that was widely tipped to succeed Wenger at Arsenal not that long ago. This is the calibre of manager that we're looking at here. And football can give you a few bumps, and he's obviously been sitting out this season. But and things move on quickly. But his credentials are absolutely impeccable, and I think he's a more natural fit and possibly less of a gamble than somebody like Jesse Marsh. Yeah,
well, Gerard Hackett here says if Eddie Howe was to come, he'd be here by now, which is a good point, and a lot of Celtic fans are thinking that, he'd be a good fit, but, well, what we're waiting for, there's a Scottish Cup that could be won. It could beat Rangers, it could set him up with the players to the end of the season and get into pre-season, but listen, he's a name that just won't go away, so time will tell on that one. Guys, just to finish off, just a wee bit of lightheartedness to cheer ourselves up. There'll obviously be big turnarounds at the club in the summer, new managers, coaches, but a whole host of new players said coming in, and the dreaded initiations when new players come in. I mean, we must have some memories. I remember going to Celtic, I got away with it. So I did, because it was a change in dressing room at that time. I think there was a bit of a divide in the dressing room. You had all the big hitters, John Hartson, Alan Thompson and Petrov, who were scared in the young guys. So I kind of slipped under the radar when I came in. But years gone by, when I seen players coming in, we had a fair few. And my overriding memory was Dory coming in. Now, Dory, a right back who'd played in Germany for a number of years. His dad was famous, of course, for being probably the best South Korean player ever. And he'd had about, 70 caps by then, played in World Cups, a machine of a guy, and quite quiet. And we went away to America, to Seattle, and it was dinner time. Lenny was great at this, calling in, the kangaroo court and all that stuff. And, right, it's a new signings time to sing, and I remember getting embarrassed at these points when I was watching, going, I can't watch this, because Dory, South Korean, he's going to be shy, and he walked up. I've never seen a guy said explode into a song like this in my life. He exploded into a Korean rap song and did not miss a word of it. Dance moves, the lot, up in a chair, and from that moment on, he just ingratiated himself into the squad, and he was such a laugh. He was so outgoing after that. It was almost like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Another one was Andy Hinkle told the worst joke that killed a room about, I'll not go into it, it was playing on a German accent. About,
so he got away with a joke?
We could do a choice, a singing or a joke, and Andy Hinkle was telling some joke about phoning the Coast Guard and saying, I am sinking. And the Coast Guard says, what are you thinking about? And that was, he just killed the room dead. But there was a few, Adam Matthews. It's all right backs, actually. Maybe that's how I got hunted at Celtic. I wasn't talented enough. Adam Matthews was like he was at a boy band. He was an unbelievable singer. But, I mean, was it as prevalent in your days as it was mine?
When I looked at what we were going to be discussing, it never really seemed to be, certainly no singing, thankfully. Not my strongest point, but I'm like you. We'd players when I went into the management side at Dundee United as well. You found I get more embarrassed for the player than the player himself. Going back to my time, we had Neely Mockin, Celtic legend, as Paul. You might remember Neely. He was our kind of kit man at Celtic when I joined in '92, and he regularly used to get the young boys out, checking if the undersoil heating was on by sticking their fingers in the...
They didn't fall for that, did they?
He got them all the time. Chris Hay was one. Remember Chris Hay? He was one. So that was the kind of things that we did. It was more wee kind of tricks and stuff to endear yourself to the squad, but thankfully I missed the singing.
Paul, what about yourself? Back in your day, initiations, when you came to Celtic, did you have anything, or do you remember any? Or were you the ringleader and pulling boys out?
Well, I was the one that sort of hid behind it all and just allowed other people to flourish, for their talents to flourish. And I always remember Jack Anoski, because I'm sure he said he never drank lager until he came to Glasgow, or prawn cocktails. And I noticed,
random.
The most 80s thing you could mention on this.
Correct. And that night he said to me that he sampled both. And in the end, that was the death of him at Celtic, because he put on about 1.5 stone the following season. That was a prawn cocktail and lager. So
Pints.
That exactly. So that was his initiation that made us decide that for more ways than one, we called him the second George Best. To be quite honest with you. So but he was a great lad, and I think I was very lucky that it was a brilliant dressing room. If there's one thing, as you know. And I think that's where sort of university, although the game's gone international and gone global now, there is this kind of inner sanctum. There is this humour. There is something special within the dressing room that all cultures, all faiths, all religions, they find their way around it. That's the most powerful tool that football's got, not just break down barriers and deal with issues like we spoke about, racism and anti-discrimination and everything else, but the way it brings people together, in such a friendly and wonderful and mature way. Jack Anowski, he couldn't speak virtually a word of English, but all he knew was lager and prawn cocktail, So he was spreading that all the time, And I remember, I don't know if there was a great night when we got beat 5-4 by Partizan Belgrade. And Jack Anowski got all 5 goals. I mean, he didn't have any lager as his pre-match meal, but he had about 4 prawn cocktails. So that's that's where it stood. So that always sort of chimes in my mindset. And but it was fantastic. The dressing room's a very, very special place indeed.
Yeah. Foreigners coming into our culture, said, and being handed some of the local delicacies sometimes don't always go down well. I mean, I remember Nakamura, or being told the story of Nakamura. I went in January. He signed in the summer, and they took him on the Christmas night out. And I think it might have been Lenny. Gave him one of the Naka didn't drink. Gave him one of these snus. He had it to Parkhead. He put up the gum, and
good night.
Naka was carted out legless about half an hour later, and we never seen him on a night out ever again. That was him. He was done. John, any quick tales in the newspaper business of initiations?
The one that always springs to mind. Do you remember when Big John Hartson signed for Wimbledon, and he turned up with like the $5,000 suit on?
Aye.
And there was a picture of the suit on fire being thrown out the window. Turned up, he chucked it out, and I think then his tracksuit went, and he's just been set flat all his gears. So that was the old crazy gang, wasn't it? Vinnie Jones,
certainly was.
And all that. Not for
me,
but
no doubt about that. It brings a dressing room together, I think, straight from the off, and it gets everybody on the same page. So Celtic will have to deal with that in the summer, I'm sure, with all the new signings. Guys, that's us. Paul, thank you very much for joining us, giving your time up to us, and some great points in there. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. All the best, guys, and thank you all. Great to you.
Cheers, thanks. Cheers, and John, thanks once again to yourself. Speak to you, hopefully, in the next few weeks. That's us, Sid. Good podcast today.
A lot to discuss there. I thought Paul was brilliant.
Brilliant,
it was really good to listen to his stories there from yesterday. I think I just missed out. He was away in 91.
By the way, I thought of this the day, how old you must be.
Just missed out.
Aye.
Remember you saying you were only 5 or 6?
Exactly. There you go, the difference between us. But you make some good points. Eddie Howe, bang on. There'll be bookies odds tumbling at the thought of that everywhere. So that's us, guys. Good podcast today. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks to our sponsors, First Star Legends Gin, Social Recluse, and also follow us on @HuddleCeltic, Instagram, the Celtic Huddle Podcast, and the same on YouTube, Celtic Huddle Podcast. Click subscribe and turn on your notifications so you don't miss a live show, and we'll see you all again next week.